This is Robyn Leslie with OnlyTheInspired.com, and I have the beautiful Dr. Joyce Martella with me today. And she has one of the most incredible stories that I've ever heard, one where, most people never have gone through things that she's gone through. So hopefully she'll share a little bit about that and how she came around and kicked its butt, basically. So, Miss Joyce, in a couple of minutes, how would you describe you, what you do, and how you help people?
Well, I am someone who was born and raised in a destructive cult, and my mother was the leader of it. And when I left, it was really me escaping the way I was feeling. It was trying to save my children. I had two little children, a 3-year-old on my hip, and my husband and I were walking out with our 5-year-old between us. And we had no idea where we were going to go. But we did know that going into the world, we were putting ourselves in danger. We believed that harm would come to us because we had been told that leaving the cult, we would leave our protection and then we would go into the world that would try to destroy us. But we felt that things were not okay where we were, and we really were leaving to save our children. I myself believed that even if God did turn his back on me, and even if he, caused me harm or hurt me or got me into a car accident, that was okay because he couldn't blame my children because they were innocent. So he could hurt me all he wanted, but my children, I believed, would be protected. When I left, I didn't know I was leaving a cult. And it wasn't until later that I figured that out. And it was much later than that I started to understand what had happened to me. Why did I feel so different than all the people around me? Well, as I went to school, I realized that I had come from a totally different culture. And I left my religion. And of course, I left my whole family, my brothers, my sisters, my nieces, my nephews. Everyone that I had ever known in my life was there. And so I was very alone and I felt very lonely. But I also was doing everything I could to bring hope to my children. And as I went to school and I began to understand, I started to see my struggle in a different way. I saw myself as almost an immigrant coming into a new land, not understanding the language and not understanding how everything worked. When my husband and I got our first house, just a rental, I didn't know how to get the electricity turned on. I didn't know where to go to get the water turned on. We moved in and I'm like, there's no water. And my husband's like, I think you might have to call somebody for that. And I'm like, who do I call? And he goes, I'm not sure, but I'll see if I can find out. And he had a job. And so he, kind of asked around, hey, what do you all do for the water company or something? He didn't really know either, but we figured it out. And, the first 10 years, I would say it was a lot of just surviving. And my husband and I were just supporting each other and surviving together. We were learning how to speak a new language so we didn't sound so weird. So we would teach each other not to speak, the cult language. We would say, no, you can't say that. That's cult language. Nobody understands that. It makes you sound weird. And we helped each other change our language to language that was more adaptable. And I can imagine that that's exactly what immigrants feel when they come and their parents say, no, speak English. Speak English, learn how to speak English. And for us, even though we spoke English, the words had different meanings. The way we talked, our cadence, it was totally different. And the other thing that made that difficult is when people used words that had connotations that were negative or derogatory for us, when they spoke them, we felt that negative connotation, even though they may not have been meaning that. And so it was very hard to sort out, what do they really mean? Also, when you live especially when you're raised in a cult, there's a lot of secrets. And there's a lot of things that are hidden. So you hide stuff yourself, but a lot of things are hidden from you. So as a child, you become hyper vigilant, trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to react? Because if you don't react right, you're going to be in big trouble. And so you're constantly looking at everybody, looking at how other people respond. If one kid responds that way and they get smacked, then you know that's not the way to respond, and you figure out a different way to respond. So it's a very tentative thing where you're just interacting all the time, trying to figure out, how do I stay out of trouble? How do I look like the good kid? How do I get approval? How do I get love? Which was not dispensed a lot. And for myself, being the daughter of the cult leader, you would think that that gave me prominence and position, but it didn't. She ignored me. I was not one of the chosen children, even though I was her child. So it actually caused me a lot of pain because I was not chosen, even though I was her child. So I didn't get the privilege, and I didn't get the things that you would think someone who was the child of the leader would get. But I did get all the responsibility. I did get all the pressure. I did get, you need to be an example. You need to, you need to make me look good all the time. So whenever I didn't make her look good, whenever I was just a kid and did something that kids do, but it didn't shine good on her, I was humiliated and totally degraded in front of everybody. Having to wear a sign around my neck saying, I can't keep my mouth shut, or I'm stupid, or whatever it was that she wanted me to have to wear. And so that the abuse was there all the time. The emotional abuse was there. And as I continued to struggle to kind of figure out why don't I feel okay? Why don't I know who I am? Why am I not sure what it is I like or what I don't like? Why is there so many questions? And as I went into my master's program and I started really studying what happens to children under this kind of abuse, I realized that I wasn't allowed to form my own identity. I was told what to be, who to be, how to act, how to think, how to dress, how to walk, how to talk. I was told whether or not I could be a singer or not a singer, or if I could, be an artist or not an artist. You were told it didn't matter if that was your natural talent. If that wasn't what the leader wanted you to be, you weren't. And the best way for me to explain this is to say, we were told we were all part of a big puzzle. And you're told you have to be yellow. That's all you can be. So don't let red come out. Don't let anything other come out. Don't let any natural tendencies of your own come out. You are yellow. And for you to make the whole picture look right, you can't deviate from that yellow. And when you did, you'd be in trouble. So you learn to take all those natural things that are part of your authentic identity and you bury them. You bury them so deep inside yourself that when you leave the cult, you don't even know where they're at. Because you have learned that if you do not bury these things deep in yourself, when they come out, you'll be annihilated for them. So then when you leave the cult and you try to start finding out, who am I and what do I think and what's real to me? You're having to go on a treasure hunt. Now, the cool thing is those pieces are all still there. You just have to find them. And you're having to find the things that you buried and even hid from yourself. So it takes time. It's not an overnight process. And part of the problem too is if you think of it as being on an island and you've buried all these treasures all over this island so that the pirates, which are all the adults and all the people in the cult, can't come and find it. The problem is you got to go back to the island to find them. Not back to the cult, but back to the island. And when you do, you are going to encounter triggers, and you are going to experience some of the trauma that you might have experienced when you buried that. So it's not a totally delightful process, but it is a wondrous process. When you find that piece, that nugget of yourself, and you pull it out and you go, that's me. That's real. That's who I am. Then you start to actually let that identity, that authentic identity, come out. A man named James Hillman said that we're all born with this like acorn in ourselves that holds all of our authentic identity. If we're lucky and we're born into a family that allows all those things in that acorn to come and develop, and we actually grow up and become those things if we're nurtured. But if we're unlucky and we have family who doesn't nurture us and who doesn't allow us to develop those, we will have to do that later by ourselves. And it's much harder because there's usually a lot of trauma around not developing. But I see all the trauma that we endured as children. And then even after we left, we were continued to be traumatized by the triggers and things that would happen that would get us right back to that place. It's like the crooked tree. So a tree grows and something happens. Something gets in the way, something bends it, and it becomes crooked. But then it grows up straight because it reaches for the light. And eventually it does come out and it does produce whatever fruit it's supposed to produce. It does bloom and it does reach for the light. But it will always have the bent part of it. That's the trauma. We cannot undo the trauma. There's no saying it didn't happen. There's no saying get over it. Oh, can't you get past that? Why can't you let it go? It is a part of us. It is now a part of who we are. But we don't have to stay in the traumatic reliving of it, but we do have to accept that that is part of who we are. And then we grow past it. And for me, it has been a journey and a discovery process to find who I am. And it hasn't always been easy. And it has taken a long time to find the pieces of myself and bring them out and let them bloom. But I have done it, and there is hope. And what I have found is that I have transformed my trauma into strength. Because of the trauma that I have endured, because of the experiences I have lived, I am a very strong woman because of it. Would I wish anyone to go through what I went through to get strong like me? No.
Right.
But do I wish the strength and the hope for everyone who has endured the kind of trauma I endured? Yes. And because I have found a way to get there, it is my hope that I can guide people there so that it doesn't take as long as it took me. So it doesn't take them having to go get their master's in counseling and then get their Ph.D. in depth psychology to work through all of this and figure it out. I've been there. I have found the way. And though each person is going to find their particular path, I have found elements that can actually help you. So you don't have to go through what I went through. And it doesn't have to take as long as it took me. And that is what I am hoping to bring to other people who have lived through being raised in a cult, lived through the abuse, lived through the neglect, lived through the shame and the humiliation and all those things where they should have been hugged and loved, they weren't. And I remember at one point for myself, part of my own working through it, I had to, as my adult self, tell my child self that I was actually worthy of love. And I had, because there was nobody doing that there. And I had to say, yeah, it was wrong for that to be done to you. And I had to reach out to my child self and say, I, who I am now, love that little girl. And that was part of the process for me of healing. And, you know, I spoke to my mother 2 years ago. And I went back to the cult, which there's very few people there now. But I went back and I talked to her. She asked me, do we have anything unresolved? And I said, oh, yeah, we do. And I thought, do you really want to open this can of worms? But she did. And I went and she said, well, come back in the morning. And I came back. And my older sister, who was at the time still in the cult, was there. And she couldn't take responsibility for anything.
Your mom
everything
or your sister?
was my mother. She could take responsibility for nothing. It was, she would look at my sister and say, did I do that? That doesn't sound like me. And my sister would say, yes, you did. And she goes, well, no, it just doesn't sound like me. And when I told her, one of the things that really caused me a lot of pain as a child was I would go and hug my mother, and every hug was always ended in, get off me, quit hanging on me, leave me alone, just get away. And I realized that I kept going back because I needed my mother to love me. And I kept going back, but every time I went back, I was rejected over and over and over again, till finally I just quit going to her. But it took me way too long to figure it out. I needed her approval. I needed her love so bad that I kept going back. And in going back, I kept being rejected over and over and over again. And when I told her how much that hurt me, she said, well, I never really did like hugs, which was a lie, because I was there when she made people line up and hug her. I was there when she made every child hug her. So I knew that just as all cult leaders, they lie, they excuse themselves, they take no responsibility for the harm they cause. She could take no responsibility. And when we were done and she took no responsibility and she couldn't, you know, she would, anything that she couldn't figure out how to answer, she would say, is there anything else? She wouldn't answer it. She'd just say, is there anything else? So, okay, we're going to go past that one. We're going to brush right past that. I'm not dealing with that. And in the end, my sister said, well, Joyce, do you know that, you know, your mom loves you? And I said, well, no, not really. And she said, Mom, do you love your daughter? And she said, well, I loved her when she was a little girl. She said, I loved her when she was a baby. She said, Mom, do you love your daughter standing right here in front of you? And she said, well, I loved her when she was a little girl. Mom, this is your daughter, Joyce, your baby. Do you love her? She said, I really don't know her. And
I can't imagine what that would be like. Super, super sad.
It was. And I can only say that I'm glad that I already had come to the place that I knew my mother didn't love me. Because when I loved my children and I knew that I would do anything for them, and I would suffer anything for them, and I would give up anything for them, I knew what real love for your child is. And I knew my mother never did any of that. She sacrificed me. She never gave anything up for me. It was all about herself. And I realize now my mother is a narcissist, among other mental disorders, but that doesn't excuse who she is.
Or
And
what
it doesn't,
happened to you, or how you felt about the whole situation.
right. And it doesn't excuse her abuse, her neglect, her harm. And there were so many people that she harmed. And the funny thing is, when I first talked to some other people who had left the cult, then I would say, well, at least she never abused me. And they looked at me and said, what? She was horribly abusive to you, Joyce. And I had to go back and look at that was true. She was abusive to me. She was emotionally, physically, I mean, and I couldn't remember. I could remember all the abuse she perpetrated on other people, but it was hard for me to remember the time that she just slapped me because I had toenail polish on, or the time she grabbed me by the hair and shook me and slapped my face 2 or 3 times because my hair was cut too short. And how I had to go run outside and climb in a tree and stay in the tree for like 6 hours until everybody quit hunting for me. That was abuse. And that was terrifying. And
Neglect by itself is abuse.
Yes. And the thing is, I have had to go back and look at, well, she also did not protect me. There was sexual abuse when I was a child, and she did not protect me from that. She did not protect me from other people who were abusive. She didn't protect me from people who had mental illnesses. And in fact, when I was 8 years old, I think I was 8 years old, she handcuffed me to a teenager who was threatening to commit suicide. And I really loved the girl who, she was someone I really cared about. But she handcuffed me to her, and she told me that I was responsible to make sure she didn't kill herself. So I went around with her all day, and she was getting tired of me, being handcuffed to her. After a day, she unhandcuffed us, and she told me, though, that I was supposed to stay by her, that I was not supposed to let her out of my sight. I had to go to the bathroom when she went to the bathroom. She was like 17 years old. She didn't want some little 8-year-old in the bathroom while she was going to the bathroom, but I was not to let her out of my sight. Well, she eventually got tired of having me follow her everywhere, and she ditched me. And I remember, I can still feel today the terror that I felt as I ran through the hotel that we lived in, looking for her, thinking that I had let her die. And I was saying, where is she? Did anybody see her? She's going to kill herself. It's going to be all my fault. And I remember just feeling like I had totally failed, because we were going to find her somewhere dead, and it was going to be all my fault. Well, finally, she came out when she heard me crying and screaming for her, and she was sorry. She was not trying to cause that kind of harm, but it wasn't her that caused the harm. It was my mother. It was my mother who put that burden on me and made me all of a sudden responsible for some teenager's life. And that is kind of abuse that goes so deep inside you that you bury that too, because it's hard to deal with.
Oh, for sure.
But the fact of the matter is, I have also found, as I've gone back and healed and worked through my trauma, I found that there were people who did love me. I had 2 sisters who loved me. They also were put in a position where they were new families with their own children, and all of a sudden they had to be completely and totally responsible for their little sister who was 10 years younger than them. And they were put in positions that they should have never been put in. So they loved me, and I know that they loved me, but they didn't do a lot of things right. And they didn't also protect me because they didn't know. And they were too young. At 19, to have their own children and be totally responsible for their little sister and all these other people who were living with us, random people, it was too much for them. And I have really been able to reconcile with them. Well, one of my sisters died from cancer, so but my other sister has actually left the cult finally.
Hey.
And she actually takes responsibility for the things. She has said that was wrong. What happened to you was wrong. It should have never happened. And she has actually, even though it wasn't her and it was my mother, she has tried to take responsibility for as much as she could, and has been there to listen to my stories and hear my cries and go through the pain and be there and say, it was wrong and I'm sorry. And I know that a lot of people in my position will never hear that from anybody who was part of the abuse. And that is something that I was gifted. I don't know why, but I'm thankful for it. But that happened long after I did all my other work, where I had nobody.
Right.
And so I guess the thing that's most important for me to get out is that there is hope. There is hope. You will not recover because you don't have a prior self to recover to. Recovery is about recovering that prior self that you were before you went in the cult, and you find those pieces. We don't have recovery. We have discovery. So it's a process of discovering our authentic self, that person that resides within us that we buried, to protect and to nurture it out ourselves. And that is how we transform our trauma. That is how we become the crooked tree who grows up and produces the fruit that we were meant to produce.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I first realized that I had been born and raised in a cult and that my mother was a cult leader, I was like, wow, I don't even know what to do with that. And then I was like, why me? Why me? Why did I have to be born to this cult leader? Why did I have to be raised in a cult? And then as I worked through things, became able to understand more and more, I came to a second place where I said, well, if not me, who would I choose to take my place? Nobody, not even my worst enemy. Now I'm at a totally different place. And I say, I was born to do this work. If I hadn't gone through everything that I went through, I wouldn't be able to bring a message of trauma transformation and hope to the people who've lived through similar lives. So that's why. So that I can be here today and bring hope to others and to show others that there's a way to transform their trauma into strength.
That's amazing. Well, and like you said before when we first talked, that a lot of therapists, they can't fathom what it's like. You know, there's adults that go into a cult and come back out, but then there's kids born into a cult, which a therapist, unless they've been in those shoes, they can't fathom it, they can't understand it. And you know, so when you finally get out, and I think we could talk about this for hours, but you know, when you do get out and you find that acorn inside of you, I'm sure there's a certain amount of excitement and fear about, can I, you know, I have this chance to be myself, but I'm scared to be myself because I got in trouble before. And
exactly, you're exactly right. And you make a good point about the problem that therapists have in treating people who've been born and raised in cults, and even therapists who have, as adults, joined cults and left cults. They have a taste of it, but they still do not have what we have. And what I found going to therapists myself, they weren't very successful. The first therapist I went to, when I told him I had mother issues and I tried to tell him the issues I had with my cult leader mom, he tried to make an analogy to a Jewish mom who's controlling. And I remember thinking as he was saying this to me, and I'm not trying to be racial or anything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that was his analogy. And I was looking at it going, give me a Jewish mom any day. At least she would love me. She might be all up in my stuff, and she might be a little controlling, and she might want to tell me how to live my life. She would love me. So I was like, you don't get it, buddy. You have no clue. And I remember the other thing about those of us who are born and raised in cults, and we've been traumatized so much, is we know how to totally direct someone away from anything that we do not want to talk about. And we can actually do it, making you think that we're talking about what you want us to talk about. So if you kind of zero in to something that is hard, I will turn it right back around and make you think that you got what you wanted from me, even though we never went there. Because we're really good at that. We've been doing that all our lives. We know how to give everybody what they want and never give them what is in there, because we know how to protect ourselves. And so when we go to a therapist, they have to be able to understand that. And I told my first therapist, I will redirect you. It's going to be your job to get us back on track. And I was constantly saying, do you see what I just did there? And he'd go, no, what'd you do? I go, I just changed the subject. And he'd go, you're right, you did. He never could get it. I wound up basically using him as someone that I could talk to and share my own process with. I decided that I was not getting to any of my trauma and my abuse. So I needed to start doing artwork. So I started doing it. And then I would come in and I'd show it to him and explain to him what the artwork meant. He didn't have a clue. I think I really taught him a lot, but he didn't have a clue. And some people may say, well, yeah, I'm a real trauma expert. Well, there's a trauma expert, and then there's someone who knows about complex trauma, and then there's someone who knows about cult trauma. And one of the things that on the other side that my desire is to train therapists how to help people who have endured this kind of complex trauma, because they need to understand this is a totally different animal. This is not what you've dealt with before. This is not even what the trauma experts talk about. This is different. And I have not heard even one trauma expert understand what it is that we need. They have pieces, but they don't get it. They don't really get it. I get it. I get it because I lived it. I get it because I've gone through the whole experience. I've tried to have therapists help me who were failures at it. I even tried to teach them how to help me and got some help, but not really much. And I want to be able to train therapists to be able to recognize this whole different area of trauma. It's really complex trauma. And Judith Herman actually started to understand that, because she worked with people who were, had trauma over and over and over and over again in their childhood, sexual abuse, parents who were abusive all the time, the whole time they were children. That is more analogous as to what we lived through, except that there were so many participants. It wasn't just a mother and father. There were participants all around us who kept you in line and kept you having to think this way and live this way. And so it's a much bigger thing than just having parents who are abusive. And I'm not at all saying that that's not horrifying.
No, yeah, they're both terrible.
It's just different. And so you have to approach the healing in a different way.
Right. And I think that's incredible that you're doing that. Not only that you want to help the people who have been through it, but that you want to train the therapists so that can impact so many more people to deal with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. One thing I do want to mention super quick about, so one of my favorite exercises going to the Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within is he has you visualize you holding yourself as a baby. And he's playing the song You Are So Beautiful by Joe Cocker, and loving yourself as the baby and being that person that the baby always needed to be. And that really reminded me of that, and it would make me cry. Still, it's kind of making me cry right now. But yes, so you can be that person and be the one that loves you if there was nobody else to do that. But to try and figure that all out on your own is just, it's a huge mountain to climb, and you've climbed it. And I'm sure you're not 100%. You did some of the bravest stuff you could possibly do by escaping. At the same time of escaping, feel like you're in harm for doing so. So it was, which is the lesser of the evils. And, to do that for your kids, is just incredible.
Well, I mean, I do have to be honest about the fact that before I left, there was a whole period of time where I was suicidal, where I actually had a plan and had everything set up where I was going to end it all, because I did not see any hope. And I felt like I was drowning. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I just did not see that there was any hope. And the only thing that kept me from doing that was I got kind of a picture of my daughter coming in and seeing me dead and saying, why won't mommy wake up? And I was like, I can't do to my children what my mother did to me, which is to leave me in this place to fend for myself. So it was, I don't care how much pain I'm in. I don't care how horrible I feel. I will not desert my children. And if I had not had children, I don't think I'd be here today. I was too distraught. I was too hopeless. And I just really didn't feel like I had anything to live for except my children. And so thinking of my children and saving my children and knowing that I could not desert my children like my mother deserted me and leave my children to fend in this place by themselves, that I had to be stronger than that, and that I had to live so I could save them. But I did not think I was saving myself. I thought I was already lost. I didn't think there was any hope for me. I thought there was only hope for my children. And for that, I would walk over hot coals. And in many ways, in some ways, that's what it felt like I was doing. I was enduring the kind of pain and the kind of loss and the kind of separation. I was ostracized from my own family. My own sisters and brothers wouldn't speak to me. I got letters from them and from other people in the cult who I'd known all my life saying mean and horrible things about me that weren't true. And it was devastating. We had to stop opening any letter that came from them, because it would send us into such a whirlwind of despair. And, I do understand where someone could feel that there is no reason to go on. But I also understand that having my children was my reason to go on. But I have to be honest that I did not think that there was any hope for me.
But now that you're on the other side of that, children or not, aren't you grateful that you never took your own?
Oh, I am so grateful. And I was so wrong. There is so much hope. And there was hope for me. And it wasn't all lost. And there was still a part of me that could be salvaged. And there was a part of me that could be not just salvaged, but could be good and could be strong and could be healthy and could help other people and to bring joy and laughter to other people. And it's like not to just be okay and not crippled, but actually to be a force to help others. I am so glad that I had my children to survive for, because then I found out that I was worth surviving. And that's something I want people to understand, that just because you're giving this message over and over and over that you're not worth it, it's not true. You are worth every minute. And you are lovable, and you have good inside you, and you have wonderful characteristics. They're going to come out and they're going to be unique to you, and they might be quirky, and you might be wonderfully talented in some areas, but it's you, and it's wonderful.
So describe your ultimate vision for your business. And I think you did that a little bit with really educating therapists on how to help other people. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah. So my vision for my business is that I will be able to educate people in the mental health profession, therapists, psychiatrists, whoever, counselors, and there's LCSWs, there's MFTs, there's the whole gamut of different people who actually help people. And my wish and my desire is to actually educate them about the particular kind of complex trauma that people who are born and raised in cults or destructive environments, what they have and what they need and what they don't need. So there are some major do nots, and then there are some major do's. And I will just give you an example of one. A lot of experts in trauma therapy and complex trauma therapy they say that a person telling their story is not necessary, and that to do so would just re-traumatize them. In my experience with most people who've been born and raised in these kind of environments, they absolutely need to tell their story. But they don't just need to tell their story, they need to tell their story and have someone believe it and validate them. Because one of the things that they need to understand, that is therapists and people in the mental health profession, is that all of our life, we were denied our story. All of our life, we were told things that happened to us didn't happen. Things that we knew happened to other people, they would say, no, that's not what happened. That's not how it went down. And so all of our life, our own stories have been denied or reframed. No, it wasn't like that. It was like this. It wasn't so bad. It was this. It wasn't sexual abuse. It was love. It wasn't, abuse. It was, discipline, and so constantly having your story reframed when that's not the truth and retold or even denied. When you step into a therapist's office and they cannot believe that these things happen to you, and their first thing is to label you with a mental disorder, because they cannot believe that anybody of sound mind, and what I mean in sound mind is somebody who doesn't have a mental disorder, could possibly have gone through these things. So you must be mentally incapacitated.
Like
so you
schizophrenic or something?
Schizophrenic or bipolar, or they could put any label on it that they want to. And because you could fit into a lot of different ones. So the idea is, no, the story needs to be listened to, and the story needs to be believed. It needs to be validated. It's like if a girl walked into your office and said, I was raped. And you said, well, maybe you were. Maybe you just didn't say no. Maybe you led him on. Maybe it wasn't really rape. If I can't see the bruises, then it wasn't real. It wasn't really rape. And if if you made yourself available, or if you wore those kind of clothes,
You were
then you were
asking,
asking for it. So people know now that no, that is not the way you would deal with someone who has been raped. And so the idea is they know that now about people who've been raped. But, excuse me, sorry.
oh, you're good.
But they don't know that about people who are born and raised in cults. So the idea is to educate them about what our experience is and how to help us the best and what not to do. So before you actually, if you want to help someone with trauma, there's all kinds of things that can help people with trauma. But before you employ any of those tools or those avenues, you have to really get their story first, because you can't use body work necessarily with someone who's been raped over and over and over again. That may not be the way to go. And you can't necessarily, there's other things that you can't do, because even though it seems like that's what you would do with someone who has trauma, that's not what you would do with them. And I actually took the time to have people who were born and raised in cults take a survey for me. And I got 50 respondents. And okay, that's not huge from all the people that have been born and raised in cults, but it's the only one of its kind. And it takes people from all different cults. It wasn't from one cult. It was from many different cults and different types of cults. And they all said the same thing. The one thing they all emphatically agreed on is I want someone to listen to my story and to believe me. That was the biggest thing. And so that is something that therapists need to understand. And there's more. I mean, that's just one. We don't have time to go into all of it. And I'm not doing a training for therapists right now, but that's what I'm talking about. So being able to actually educate them in how to treat people who've been in these kind of environments. And then the second part is to help people who've actually lived through this. And my hope is to, what I envision is eventually being able to go and speak all over the world to therapists and mental health professionals about this, and to also be able to bring my workshops for people who've been born and raised in cults to them. In the United States, there are 2 facilities where people can go who've been born and raised in cults. That's all. And neither of them are geared towards people who are born and raised. They do help them, but they're not geared toward them. My workshops, I will be geared towards people who are born and raised in cults and destructive environments and who have suffered complex trauma. And instead of asking them to come up with the money to go to these different places, I want to bring the workshops to them. So I want to bring them to the East Coast, to the West Coast, to, the middle of the state, to here, to there, to England, to wherever else. They're all over Australia, to Brazil, to all the places where there are cults and there are people suffering.
So coming from somebody, I only know one person that was born in a polygamous family, and she's one of like 23 kids. And I'm very curious how that was for her. And I don't know how polygamous family is compared to a cult. I also have not a clue. The only knowledge of me of a cult are the things that you see on TV, like that one where everybody was it Waco, where everybody was shot and killed, or were they poisoned themselves? We watched a documentary. I think it's
Jonestown?
Unexplained. I think it was Unexplained about cults, but I have not a clue how many there are, where they are. And, you know, when you said earlier that you guys lived in a hotel, you know, because I'm thinking, was it a compound of some kind? Did you go to school at all? But you lived in a hotel? So, you know,
when I was younger, we lived in a hotel right in the middle of Santa Cruz, right? Just a couple blocks from the boardwalk.
Wow.
Then
wow.
we moved all the way to Northern California near the Oregon border because that was the promised land, but also because that was as far away from anybody you could get. And we actually bought this large property eventually in a little town that if you blink your eyes, you'd pass right through it and not know that there was a town there. And that's where we kind of set up. Eventually, that's where we landed, and everybody lived there. And in some ways, it was kind of like a compound. And but there weren't fences around it. Okay, so it wasn't like that.
There's
but
fear, fear, pretty much.
If you've ever watched the movie The Village by M. Shyamalan, I don't think I have his whole name right. It's a movie that actually can explain how a cult could actually form from people having good intentions, and then it turns into terrorizing their children. And when I first watched that, it actually was very triggering for me because of what was going on, and how the parents all got together and told their children these things, and that there was a monster, and if they went into the woods, then they would be demolished by this monster. And so the kids were all afraid, and they were actually living in this forest that was only miles from a major city, but they were living a pioneer life, and they were afraid to leave. They never would leave. Because
was it creepy, like a creepy, it's a creepy movie, right? I think I remember the previews, and it was like they showed little girls and then they disappear or something like that.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it was, it actually depicts what goes on in cults, and kind of, not everything, but how that can happen, how children could be convinced that the outside world is to be feared and to never go into it. He does a really good job of demonstrating how that can happen. And because, you know, people will ask, well, why did you believe it? Well, I was told that from the time I was young. And, you know, I was told, and almost everybody who's raised in a cult, I won't say everybody, but almost everybody who's raised in a cult is taught to believe that they are going to save the world. And I remember being in a workshop with other survivors, and, you know, one person was from a running cult, and they were like, no, we were going to save the world. You know, we were from a pseudo-Christian cult. We were going to save the world. Somebody else was from a meditation cult. They were going to save the world. Another person was from, a different kind of cult, and they were going to save the world. We all thought we were going to save the world. None of us were saving the world. We couldn't even save ourselves. Right? Mm-hmm. But we used to joke in some of the workshops that I attended, did all the cult leaders go to the same school to learn how to do all these things? Because there were so many similar things that would happen. So many similar things, like rationing toilet paper and rationing water and making you collect rainwater for the bad times, and gardening and canning your own food, and so much suspicion of the outside world and things like that. So there's things that they have in common, and then there's things that are very different about each one of them.
Do you have any idea of how many there are? how many
Yeah.
cults there are, or how
No.
you would even get in touch with people who are right now stuck in a cult. Is there any way of contacting them?
It's harder to get people out of a cult when they are in it. And what I more want to be able to do is to help people who leave, because they're the ones who are lost and they're scared and they don't know what to do and they don't understand what's going on. And but they knew for some reason they had to leave. And for everybody, that's a different reason. But there's something that happened. And sometimes there's an incident that happens, but they bury that. They don't even know that that might have been the trigger for them leaving, because they might not have left for another 6 months after that, because it started like piling on until finally they just had to go, or something happened that triggered them having to leave. Their child being humiliated, and them being humiliated, or sometimes even being kicked out. But that didn't happen as often. Most people didn't get kicked out. They left.
And it's got to be the most courageous thing you've ever done, to leave the only world that you knew, but you knew it was not good, to go out into a world where you thought you were going to be harmed just by doing that. That's crazy.
Yes, it was.
I love what you're doing. And so since there are those 2 places that people could go to, have you contacted them to try and educate those people who are helping those people?
Well, most of them have done a lot of educating, and I actually am in contact with one of them and have offered to go and do some, workshops. And then COVID happened. So that kind of stopped things in the tracks.
That's just a hiccup.
But I'm definitely available to, share my experience with them, to help them better help the people who come to them.
Gotcha. So what was, so when you were going to school, and when you got your doctorate, you probably didn't know that you wanted to turn around and help other people, or did you?
No, I did.
You did.
So when I did my master's thesis, when I did my master's in counseling and I did my thesis, basically every paper that I wrote was about what happens to people who are born and raised in cults. What happens to people who are traumatized from an early time in their childhood? What are those effects? So almost everything, and how do you diagnose that? How do you help it? How do you see it? Because I needed to understand what happened to me. And I understood that it was in the developmental process that my identity was hijacked. And I was not allowed to develop my authentic identity. So that's kind of what my master's was about. When I started my dissertation and I started my doctorate program, it was about, given the complex trauma that people who are born and raised in destructive cults come out with, how do you help them heal? So my dissertation was all looking at, how do you help people who have complex trauma heal? Well, there wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't anything about how do you help people who were born and raised in cults heal, but there was some information about complex trauma. So I was able to put that together. I was able to talk to other people who had shared my experience and really put together an outline to help other people who are in the healing profession know how to go about helping us. And so once my master's thesis is published and then my dissertation is published, I'm hoping that my dissertation will be like a handbook to help therapists.
Oh, I love that. So what was the hardest thing to overcome when starting your business? Now, you're just starting, right?
I'm just starting. Yeah. I would say the hardest thing to overcome in deciding to go forward with this was there was a part of me that if I publish my book, if I start doing this, if I get out there on podcasts, if I do this, then my family might reject me. But then I had to be honest with myself. They already did. They already did. What? So they're going to reject me again? I only have 2 brothers and 1 sister who are alive. And the one sister has left, and she's totally supportive of me. So she's not going to reject me. And the other one is still running the facility, the cult, and there. And the other one kind of has his own little thing in another place. And neither of them have ever reached out to me. And I have reached out to them. When my one brother had a heart attack, I sent him flowers and said, I was praying for him. I hope he was well. When my other brother had a heart attack, I sent a message to his wife saying, I hope, I'll keep him in my prayers. But neither of them ever reached out to me. And, that's just what it is. That's how it is when you come from a cult.
Right.
Because as far as I know, the younger of the 2 brothers, he's not younger than me, he's older than me. There's a certain amount of, I betrayed the family. I betrayed my mom. And he didn't. And so I get it. There's still a lot of healing. And I don't know that will happen. I pray for it, but I don't know that it will. But that's not going to stop me. And I realize that I have some nieces and nephews, and great nieces and nephews, who may not understand where I'm coming from. But I also have some other nieces and nephews and godchildren who totally know where I'm coming from. And I was, in fact, just recently talking to one of my nieces, and she was like, I am so glad you're doing this, Auntie. We need this. We need this because we want to heal. And thank you so much for doing this. And thank you so much for, being brave enough to do it. And I know that even my sister has told me, this is the time to do it. There are people out there hurting. There are people that I would call my nephews and my relatives who are suffering with addiction and suffering with other things because they had such horrible things done to them that they cannot live with it and they don't know how to heal. And I'm doing this for them. I'm doing this for one of my nephews who took his own life. I'm doing this so that no more take their own lives. And that's my motivator, because even though at first I had that fear that was keeping me from going forward, I realized that's a lie. Mm-hmm. I've already been ostracized and rejected, and it can't, even if they do it again, so what? They already did it. How, you stabbed me once, it's, you can't really undo that. It's already done. Right. So I feel like, no, I don't have anything to lose, and I have so much to gain. And there are so many people who can be helped.
Yeah, you're an angel. You're doing an angel's work for, and it's a scary thing, but, just it's the perfect, my message. And there's so many people that you can help that's far above and beyond, the fear of the people who already rejecting you more. And I'm curious, and it'll probably be in the next, actually it's in the next question. So do you have the support network of friends or family that are saying, Joyce, you have to do this? Obviously your sister. Yes. I'm very curious about your kids. Or are you doing this no matter, it doesn't matter, I'm doing this if nobody encourages me or they tell me it's the dumbest thing ever? I'm curious where you are, and I'm very curious about what your kids are thinking about it now, considering you got out of it for them and you saved them from this life that you lived, that you grew up at?
My kids are supportive. I think that they will be surprised when it all turns out, when it all is out there. But they're supportive. They're, of course, supportive. They want me to be able to help other people. And, the thing is, there's this thing called, it's when your parents have had major trauma, complex trauma, like my husband and I did, and then you have children and you're trying to work through your trauma, your children are traumatized also. So as much as we wanted to save them, in some ways, they had to live through some of the trauma of our growing pains. And so I wouldn't say we totally saved them. I would say we mostly saved them, because we saved them from a lot of abuse and a lot of trauma that they would have had to experience themselves. But I think what we didn't realize is that as we were trying to work through our trauma, which we didn't really even know that that's what we were doing, that there was some trauma that they actually endured. And for that, I wish I could undo that. I just didn't know enough. I just didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand that I was even traumatized. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand that my working through it actually put some trauma on them. And sadness that they should not have had to live with. But, I can only say what I would say to someone who was coming out with children, how they might do it differently than I did it, and how I would want to help them do it differently. But I can't go back and undo what I did. And I know that my children are who they are because of what they lived through, just as because of what I lived through.
Right. Well, and even in a normal family, if you've had I look back at my family's history and see, like my grandma, she's 98 years old. And so she was one of 13, and, they worked the cotton fields and stuff like that. And she had to force her parents to go to school. And, there was not that love and connection that she got from her parents. And so I'm sure she was a little bit better with her daughter, who was probably a little bit better with her daughter.
Right.
Who I've been better than my mom. And so I think there's that progression that normally happens where, we do the best with what we can, right? We do better than our parents. That nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. Right. But as long as you're trying to do the best that you can, and, nobody's perfect.
I just didn't realize that there was something that is true, and that is secondhand trauma. I didn't understand that. And I didn't realize that till later. And then, I could see how, especially my oldest, my daughter, how she experienced a lot of that and a lot of sadness. And, I wish I could go back, and I wish I could have shielded her, but I couldn't. I didn't even know what was happening at the time. So there was nothing I could do. It wasn't like I was beating her or shaming her or doing anything like that. Not the stuff that had happened to me. And one of the things that I figured out from my mother and her rejection is I hugged my kids. I hugged my kids all the time. And I never let go first. And to the point where my kids would go, "Okay, Mom, are we done now?" And I'm like, "Yeah, if you're done, we're done." Yep. If you're done, we're done. But no, I'm not going to let go first.
And because I would, and that's important. And just like, all right, so you've overcame this huge healing, and I'm sure it's still ongoing. And so, yes, you did better with your kids than your mom did, but they can also heal. And,
yes.
And you try to protect them. And, when you knew nothing different. So yeah, don't put any of that on yourself. You know, you did the best thing. That's awesome. So what is your favorite thing about your business? Have you worked with people already that have been?
I have worked with people, and my favorite thing is when I am able to share some of the things that worked for me, when I can give someone hope, when someone can talk to me and they can tell me all the things and not feel ashamed because they don't feel like they're going to be judged for having believed that or lived that way. There's a lot of shame that comes from living in a cult like this, like any of them, because there's things that you realize later that, how could I have believed that? How could I have done that? How could I have participated in that? Or just the fact that your story includes that. And so there's some shame. And I remember when I first realized that my mother was a cult leader. And when I first started to recognize all the abuse that was perpetrated by her and even some of my siblings and a lot of other people. And I felt like, this is my legacy. How can I get out from under this? This is horrifying that my family has participated in hurting so many people and so many kids and just destroyed human beings. How can I live under that? And then I realized I didn't have to, because instead I could come out and say, okay, I can be part of the change. I can be part of someone who helps bring healing to those that were suffered, and not just at the hands of my family, but at the hands of many other people. So my legacy is not tied to my mother.
No.
My legacy is tied to what I lived through and what I transformed into strength, that trauma that I transformed into strength, and the hope that I found. That's my legacy. And everyone that I can talk to and I can show them that there is a path to discovering their authentic identity, and there is a path to transforming their trauma, no matter how horrible it is, then I can give them hope, and that will be my legacy. A legacy of hope, not a legacy of destruction and harm.
That's beautiful. And I really hope that I can help you share that message. I think that it needs to be out there. I don't think, you said there's so little help out there. For one, that most of us have never experienced what you've experienced. There's all sorts of abuse, but that's a whole different level, and that's your whole entire world. And I love what you're doing. So what inspires you? What are you passionate about? And it doesn't have to be business.
I am really inspired by other people who have really found a way to get their message out and to help others. I'm inspired by other people who want to help other people. As I've said before, yes, I want to make money, but I want to make enough money so that I can help the people who don't have the money to get the help. I don't need a mansion. I don't need a Rolls Royce or whatever car, I want to be able to, yes, I do. I want to be able to take care of my bills responsibly, but this in no way is about me becoming a multi-millionaire, gazillionaire. This is about me having enough money to be able to travel the world, to bring this message to, if I can go to one place, if I went to Australia and one person found hope, that would be enough for me. If I went to England and one person found hope, that would be enough for me. Because everywhere you bring hope, that person can then bring hope to others. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a chain reaction. I don't have to be the provider of hope for everyone, but for everyone that I hope gets hope from my story and from what I have to offer them, I hope they go out like little rivers and touch other people. And then more and more and more people will get hope and understand that there is a way to not just survive the trauma, but to actually come out and thrive and live their life. And so that's what inspires me. It inspires me when I see other people do that, because that's what I want to do. I want to touch other people's life and bring them hope.
So do you have somebody who inspires you? Is there somebody out there that, that has inspired you to, just anybody who inspires you? My inspiration's Tony Robbins. He's one of my many. I love that man, but.
Yeah, I think he's an inspiration. I wouldn't say that there is one person that I've seen that is doing what I'm going to do, but I would have to say that my inspiration really comes from those people who have actually suffered the trauma and have actually transformed it themselves. So there's a young woman who was in the Children of God cult, and she has done miraculous things with her life and transformed her trauma. She also wrote a book with her sisters, and she, has set up a foundation for other people who have been born into these kind of cultic environments, because she wants to help children. And there's another young woman who, sadly, she's passed away, but when she was still wounded, when she was still suffering, she created this whole internet group for all the people from her cult so they'd have a place to talk. And so I'm really inspired by others who have suffered even more than I have, who have been able to reach out and help others, even while they were still suffering. So that's where my inspiration really comes from.
That's beautiful. So big question. If you could leave one tip or one golden nugget for the people listening, and it was the only thing you could tell them and the only chance that you had to say it, what would that be?
For those who might be listening who have suffered horrible trauma in their life, that there is hope and they can transform it, and they're not stuck. They don't have to be stuck in that forever, but that it is their wound and they will carry the scar, but that's not something to be ashamed of. And for those who have never experienced this, if ever a person comes and is willing to share this part of their life with you, believe them and validate them.
That's awesome. Wow. Wow. I hope everybody who's watching this shares this interview, because we never know, and I believe people who came out of a cult, there's a certain amount of secrecy. They might not want to tell people that. And we might not know who needs to hear this. And so I think it's such a powerful message, and hopefully we could all share and help Joyce reach as many people as possible. And, I would love to have you write a book.
I'm in the process of it.
Okay,
I'm
good.
in the process.
Good. I think that's, it's, wow, what a session. Okay, is there anything else that you would like to share? Again, I know you have a little gift that you want to give to people. Is there anything else that you would like to share with everybody listening?
Not at this time. I because I'm still in the beginning of the business, I have my website that's coming out, but it's not out yet. When it does come out, you should be able to find it under Joyce Martella. And I am going to be starting my own podcast by the 15th of June. And so you can look for that. And it's going to be called Transforming Trauma into Strength with Dr. Joyce Martella. And I'm just in the process of trying to get the word out and to help as many people as possible.
Awesome. So the website again is Joyce, Joyce, Martella, Martella.com. And then, so if you want to try and find her on Facebook, send her a message and say 30-minute session. She's willing to give anybody a 30-minute session to talk about, what you've been through or whatever, and then you guys could go about from there. And then again, so your podcast is Transforming Trauma into Strengths or Strength?
Strength.
And so look for that. That's going to come out in 11 days. So that's a great place to connect with her, listen to her on a daily basis, be able to contact her. So thank you very, very much for being here and being so vulnerable. A lot of us, we try and hide our skeletons in the closet and never let anybody see them. But I think there's a lot of people nowadays that realize that actually by showing those skeletons, so many other people go, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing that, because I thought I was the only one. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of that where people feel so isolated when you don't have to be isolated, when you just, coming out there and being vulnerable. And that is one of the things about onlytheinspired.com is I want people to be able to be vulnerable and talk about the scariest things that, that they have and be surrounded by people that'll uplift them. So I love your message, and I'm hoping to help spread that. Again, everybody, if you believe, even just by sharing this interview, hopefully we could reach one person, maybe 10 people, maybe 100 people, or a lot more with that. People who really need to hear this message, because it would be a very scary place to be all by yourself. And
yes,
thanks again very, very much for, just being open and honest and vulnerable. And, I appreciate you. I have so much respect for you, and I'm so grateful that you made it on the other side of just what a dark place that would have been.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And I'm sure we will talk again and connect and all that kind of stuff. And thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. Appreciate you.
Thank you.